I don't want to go back to America, but you need to do something for us.
This sounds like threatening.
Is divorce in the cards?
It depends on him. I am at my breaking point, and Sumit needs to stand up and do something.
If Jenny Slatten ever looked at Sumit Singh and finally said, "No, I am not giving you $30,000, the most important part would not be the money. It would be the next 10 seconds. Does Sumit stay calm and accept that answer? Or does everything suddenly change? Because after all the years Jenny spent defending this relationship, moving her life across the world, forgiving things most people would never forgive, and proving that she was willing to stand beside Sumit when almost nobody else believed in them, one financial boundary could expose something no wedding ceremony ever could. If Sumit only feels secure when Jenny keeps sacrificing, then the problem is much bigger than $30,000. But if he can hear no and still choose the marriage, then this entire controversy starts looking completely different. And that is why the real story does not begin with Sumit asking for money. It begins with Jenny deciding whether she has anything left to give. Imagine the conversation starting quietly, without screaming, without some giant dramatic entrance, and without Jenny immediately understanding where it is going. Sumit explains that something serious has happened financially, and that he believes they need a large amount of money to fix it. Maybe he talks about protecting their future, covering a major problem, keeping a plan alive, or preventing something they built from falling apart. At first, Jenny listens because she has spent years listening to Sumit explain complicated situations that somehow became part of their life together. Then the number finally comes out. $30,000. That is when the entire mood changes, because a small amount can feel like helping your spouse through a difficult month, while $30,000 can change what your retirement looks like, what your emergency options look like, and how much independence you have if something goes wrong later. Jenny does not immediately accuse him of using her. That would almost be easier, because anger creates a clear direction. Instead, she starts doing something far more dangerous for a relationship that has always survived on emotion. She starts calculating. She thinks about what that money represents if she keeps it, what she loses if she gives it away, how difficult it would be to replace, and whether Sumit truly understands how differently financial risk works at her stage of life. Sumit may be looking at the number and thinking about a problem that needs to be solved today. Jenny may be looking at the same number and thinking about the next 10 years. That difference is where the fight really begins, because both people can stare at the same bank balance and see completely different futures. For Sumit, $30,000 might represent movement. It might mean saving something that matters to him, building a new source of stability, avoiding a failure that scares him, or simply proving that he can create a stronger future for the two of them. He is younger, which means his relationship with risk naturally looks different. If a financial decision goes badly, he still has more time to recover, change jobs, rebuild savings, start something else, or simply work longer. That does not make his concerns less serious, but it changes the way the danger feels. A younger person can lose money and think about recovery. An older person may lose the same amount and immediately think about security. Jenny's side of the table looks completely different. She has already made choices that placed enormous emotional weight on this marriage. She did not simply date Sumit and continue living the same life she had before. She built her future around being with him, which means a financial decision can never be separated from the larger question of independence. If Jenny gives away a major amount of money and the plan fails, she does not just lose cash. She loses options. That could mean less freedom to travel, less protection during an emergency, less ability to make an independent decision later, and more dependence on the marriage continuing exactly as she hopes it will. That is why the word demanded matters so much. Asking someone for help is one thing. Expecting someone to prove love by giving you money is something very different. If Sumit explains the problem, shows Jenny exactly where the money would go, listens to her concerns, and accepts that she may refuse, then this is a difficult marriage conversation. It could still become emotional, because large amounts of money can make even strong couples panic. But there is a major difference between pressure and partnership. Partnership allows both people to say no. Pressure makes one person afraid of what happens after they say it. And Jenny has a reason to think about that difference very carefully, because the relationship between these two has always involved unusually large sacrifices. There was never a simple path where Jenny and Sumit met, dated, built a home, and moved forward without major conflict. Their relationship kept asking for one more act of faith. There was always another barrier, another uncomfortable truth, another family conflict, another moment where Jenny had to decide whether staying was worth what it was costing her emotionally. What makes this $30,000 situation so different is that there may not be anyone else to blame. In the past, Jenny and Sumit could point outside the relationship. They could point at family resistance. They could point at cultural expectations. They could point at distance. They could point at paperwork, timing, or public judgment. Those outside problems sometimes made them stronger, because every new challenge gave them a common enemy. Even when they were frustrated with each other, they could eventually return to the idea that the world was making their relationship difficult. Money changes that. If Jenny and Sumit are sitting in the same room and disagreeing about what should happen to $30,000, there is no parent standing between them. There is no long-distance problem to solve. There is no outside critic they can unite against. There are simply two people who may want completely different things, and both may believe the other person is failing the marriage. That is when old sacrifices start returning to the conversation. Sumit could feel that he gave up a tremendous amount too. He could look at everything that happened with his family and believe he already proved that Jenny mattered more than comfort, approval, or an easier life. He could feel that asking Jenny to stand beside him financially is not some outrageous betrayal, but the natural next step in a marriage where he believes both people are supposed to carry each other through difficult moments. If he is scared about failure, that fear may make him talk more aggressively than he realizes. He might believe Jenny's refusal means she has stopped believing in him. Jenny could hear that and feel something completely different. She could think, how many times am I supposed to prove this? She already crossed the world. She already waded through situations that tested her patience. She already stayed when the truth about Sumit's life became far more complicated than she expected. She already defended the relationship to people who believed she was making a terrible mistake. From her perspective, refusing another major sacrifice may not mean she loves him less. It may mean she finally understands that love cannot require unlimited proof. That is the first real collision. Sumit could believe the marriage means they take the risk together. Jenny could believe the marriage means he respects the fact that she cannot take that risk. Both can say, if you really loved me, you would understand. And both can believe they are right. Now imagine Jenny asking the simplest question possible. Why exactly do you need $30,000? This is where everything either becomes clearer or far more suspicious. If Sumit has a detailed answer, the entire emotional temperature changes. Suppose he explains exactly what the money would cover, what happens if they do nothing, what other options he already tried, how much of his own money is involved, and what protection Jenny would have if the plan fails. Suddenly, Jenny is not being asked to blindly rescue him. She is being invited into a decision. She can still say no, but at least she understands what she is saying no to. However, imagine the opposite. Jenny starts asking questions and the answers stay vague. She asks where the money is going, and Sumit tells her she is overthinking. She asks what happens if the plan fails, and he tells her she needs to trust him. She asks why he cannot find another way, and he turns the conversation into a question about whether she supports him. Now the money itself becomes less important than the way he responds to accountability. That would be the moment Jenny's history with Sumit starts speaking louder than his explanation, because trust between them was never automatic. Viewers who have followed Jenny and Sumit for years remember that this relationship did not begin with complete honesty. Sumit originally presented himself through a false identity, and that alone gave Jenny an early lesson in how easily love and secrecy could exist in the same relationship. Then came the much bigger revelation that he was married to someone else, which forced Jenny to confront the fact that something enormous had been happening outside her understanding. Those events belong to the past, but the emotional memory does not simply disappear because two people eventually marry. That matters in a money argument. When someone has never hidden something major from you, a confusing explanation can simply be confusing. When someone has hidden life-changing information before, a confusing explanation feels different. It activates every old question you thought you had already buried. Is this the whole story? Is there another detail coming later? Am I being told everything now, or only enough to keep me calm? Jenny could hate herself for thinking that way, and still be unable to stop. That is the strange cost of rebuilding trust after major deception. Forgiveness can happen, love can continue, and people can move forward. But the past often leaves behind an alarm system. Most days it stays quiet. Then, something feels uncertain, and suddenly every old warning light comes back on. Sumit might find that deeply unfair. He could tell Jenny that he has spent years proving he is committed to her, and that she cannot keep dragging the worst moments of their past into every new disagreement. He could say that people make mistakes, people change, and marriage cannot survive if one partner is permanently on trial. And he would have a point. But Jenny would have one too. Trust is not the same as forgetting. If a person wants the benefit of being trusted again, they usually have to become more transparent, not less. That means a $30,000 request would need more explanation, not fewer questions, precisely because of what Jenny already survived. Now the argument is no longer about money. It is about whether Sumit thinks his past should still affect the standards Jenny uses today. And that is where this could become extremely emotional. Suppose Sumit starts feeling humiliated because Jenny is asking for proof. He thinks she is treating him like a stranger instead of her husband. He wants her to say yes because she believes in him, not because he produced enough documents to satisfy her. He may even believe that after everything he faced from his family, Jenny should be the one person who does not make him feel like he has to defend himself. Jenny, meanwhile, may feel insulted that he expects trust to replace basic financial responsibility. She may think that love is exactly why he should want her to understand the risk. If this money is supposed to affect both of their futures, why would questions be seen as betrayal? You can already see how quickly the original problem disappears. Nobody is talking about $30,000 anymore. They are talking about respect. They are talking about trust. They are talking about every sacrifice that came before. They are talking about who gave more. And once couples start keeping score that way, the argument becomes almost impossible to finish, because there is no number that can measure emotional sacrifice. How do you compare Jenny moving her life to India with Sumit facing conflict from his family? How do you compare Jenny waiting through years of uncertainty with Sumit choosing a relationship that created enormous personal pressure? How do you calculate who paid the higher price? You cannot. But people try anyway when they feel unappreciated. That is why the next stage would be the most dangerous. Jenny says she is not giving the money. Not maybe, not let me think, not give me another week. She says no. Now we finally find out what Sumit actually wanted from the conversation. If what he wanted was Jenny's participation, he can be disappointed and still respect the answer. If what he wanted was Jenny's obedience, the answer becomes a threat. That single difference tells us more than any accusation ever could. Imagine Sumit going quiet after hearing no. He does not yell. He does not threaten anything. He simply looks hurt, because he genuinely thought Jenny would stand beside him. Maybe he leaves the room, takes time to calm down, and later comes back with another plan. He tells her he still believes the money would have helped, but he understands why she cannot risk it. He starts looking for alternatives. If that happens, the entire story changes. Suddenly, the dramatic headline becomes almost misleading, because what looked like a demand was really a crisis that two spouses handled badly for a few hours before finding their way back to each other. But now imagine the other reaction. Jenny says no, and Sumit immediately starts making the marriage part of the argument. He tells her that after everything he did for her, she owes him support. He starts questioning whether she really believes in their future. He tells her that refusing the money means she is choosing herself over the marriage. That is when the story becomes much darker, because Jenny is no longer being asked to make a financial decision. She is being asked to protect the relationship by surrendering a boundary. And that is exactly where people can confuse sacrifice with love. Jenny may start feeling guilty even if she knows she cannot afford the risk. She might think about everything Sumit went through. She might remember how hard he fought against family pressure. She might tell herself that maybe she should make one more sacrifice, because marriage requires compromise. Then she might look at her own situation and realize there is a difference between compromise and repeatedly being the person who absorbs the risk. That realization could change everything. For years, Jenny's strength has been persistence. She kept going when the situation looked impossible. She believed that if she could survive the next crisis, eventually she and Sumit would reach a point where they could simply live their lives together. But persistence has a dangerous side. Sometimes people become so proud of surviving difficult situations that they stop asking whether they should still be in them. Every obstacle becomes another challenge to defeat, instead of information to consider. What if Jenny reaches a point where she finally understands that she does not need another victory? What if she does not want to prove everyone wrong anymore? What if she simply wants peace? That would be a completely different Jenny from the woman who spent years fighting for the relationship at any cost. And Sumit would notice that immediately. Anger he could probably handle. Jenny has been angry before. Arguments eventually end. But emotional exhaustion is different. If Jenny stops arguing and simply says, "I am not doing this," Sumit loses the version of the conflict he understands. There is nothing to debate if she is no longer trying to convince him. That could create the biggest reversal in this entire situation. The person who spent years terrified that Sumit would not choose her could suddenly become the person deciding whether she still chooses him. And Sumit, who spent so much of their history holding the power to delay, hesitate, hide, or navigate family pressure, could suddenly find himself waiting for Jenny's decision. That role reversal would hit hard, because Jenny's greatest fear for years was losing the relationship she fought so hard to build. What happens when losing herself becomes the bigger fear? That is the point where $30,000 becomes symbolic. It represents the last place where Jenny may have to decide whether loving Sumit automatically means saying yes. Maybe she looks at him and explains that she will support him emotionally, help him think through the problem, cut expenses, make adjustments, and stand beside him while he finds another solution. But she will not put that amount of money at risk. That is a powerful boundary, because it removes Sumit's easiest argument. He cannot say she is abandoning him. She is still there. She is simply refusing to finance the solution he prefers. Now Sumit has to decide whether he wanted a partner or a bailout. And there is no easy way to hide that answer. If he accepts her help in every form except the money, then maybe the relationship is stronger than viewers feared. If he rejects everything because the cash was the only support he wanted, Jenny has learned something extremely important. This is also where their age difference suddenly stops being a romantic headline and becomes a practical issue. For years, the age gap was treated like something love could conquer. If two adults chose each other, why should the number matter? Emotionally, that argument made sense. Financially, age can matter a lot. Two people can love each other deeply and still live on completely different timelines. Sumit can think in terms of rebuilding over decades. Jenny may think in terms of preserving what she has because her ability to recover from a major loss is smaller. That does not make the relationship impossible. It means their financial decisions require more care. The person with more time cannot automatically expect the person with less time to take the same risk. And the person with more financial fear cannot automatically expect the younger spouse to stop trying to build something bigger. That is the real negotiation. Not whether love exists, whether their futures can still fit together. Imagine Sumit telling Jenny that he cannot spend the rest of his life being afraid to take chances just because she is older. That would be a painful thing to hear, but it could come from a real frustration. He may feel like he still wants to build, expand, work, create, and take risks, while Jenny increasingly wants stability. Jenny could answer that she never asked him to stop building. She only refuses to put her own safety at risk to fund every plan. Now the $30,000 disagreement becomes a preview of a much larger problem. What happens when one spouse wants expansion and the other wants protection? What happens when one person thinks about the next business opportunity while the other thinks about retirement? What happens when both are right about their own needs? That is why money can break relationships that survived far more dramatic things. Family opposition is obvious. Financial incompatibility is quieter. It sits inside ordinary decisions until one day the couple realizes they have been moving toward different futures for years. And Jenny may start looking backward differently. Maybe she remembers every moment when she believed the next milestone would finally create security. If they could just get through the family conflict, things would settle down. If they could just get married, things would settle down. If they could just build a normal life together, things would settle down. But real life never stays settled. Marriage does not end uncertainty. It simply changes the type of uncertainty you have to face together. The question becomes whether Jenny and Sumit built enough trust underneath all that drama to survive the boring, practical problems that come after the romantic victory. That may sound less exciting than family confrontations and huge emotional declarations, but it is actually the harder test. Anybody can say, "I will fight the world for you." The difficult sentence is, "I disagree with you, but I still respect your decision." That is what Sumit would have to prove. And Jenny would have something to prove too. She would have to separate her fear of being used from the facts in front of her. If Sumit is transparent, respectful, and willing to accept no, Jenny cannot automatically treat every financial request as evidence of betrayal simply because their history was messy. At some point, rebuilding trust requires allowing the other person to become more than their worst mistake. That balance is what makes this situation interesting. The easiest version is to make Sumit the villain and Jenny the victim. But relationships are usually more complicated than that. Maybe Sumit is genuinely scared. Maybe he believes this money could solve a serious problem. Maybe he is frustrated because he thinks Jenny does not understand how much pressure he feels to provide. Maybe Jenny is equally scared because she understands that one bad decision could leave her with fewer options than Sumit realizes. Two scared people can hurt each other without either entering the conversation intending to be cruel. Fear can sound like control. Fear can sound like selfishness. Fear can make someone push when they should listen. The truth would be found in what happens after both people calm down. Does Sumit still respect Jenny's boundary when he is no longer angry? Does Jenny still listen to Sumit's fears when she is no longer defensive? Can they solve the problem without turning love into a weapon? That is the part viewers should watch. Because anybody can say something ugly during an emotional argument. Patterns matter more. If Sumit keeps returning to the idea that Jenny must provide the money, that becomes a pattern. If Jenny keeps refusing to hear any financial plan because she assumes the worst, that becomes a pattern too. And the marriage will eventually have to decide which pattern is stronger than the love story that brought them together. There is another possibility that changes the entire tone. What if Jenny has the money, but simply refuses to use it? That would create an even more intense emotional reaction, because Sumit could interpret the refusal differently. If she genuinely does not have the money, he may be disappointed, but understand that the problem is impossible. If she has access to it and chooses not to provide it, Sumit might take that choice personally. But Jenny would have every right to ask whether access means obligation. Just because someone has savings does not mean every shared crisis should consume them. Marriage creates shared responsibility, but it does not erase individual judgment. If Jenny believes the plan is too dangerous, giving the money simply to avoid conflict could create something worse than the original financial problem. Resentment. Imagine she gives Sumit the $30,000 while privately believing it is a mistake. Every delay becomes painful. Every new expense becomes suspicious. Every time Sumit talks about the plan, Jenny remembers what she gave up. Even if the money eventually comes back, the relationship may still be damaged because she felt pressured into taking the risk. And if the plan fails, that resentment could become explosive. Jenny would not only be angry about losing the money, she would be angry at herself for ignoring her instinct. She would replay the conversation and wonder why she could not say no. That is why the healthiest outcome may actually involve Jenny refusing. A clear no forces the relationship to reveal whether it can survive boundaries. It prevents a hidden resentment from quietly building for months. It also forces Sumit to find out whether his plan can survive without relying on Jenny's money. Maybe that is exactly what he needs. Sometimes support means helping someone succeed. Sometimes support means refusing to protect them from every consequence. If Sumit believes strongly in whatever the $30,000 is supposed to accomplish, he can search for another way. He can reduce the scale, delay the plan, find partners, save longer, borrow responsibly if appropriate, or decide the risk is simply too high. Jenny's refusal would not destroy his future. It would force him to own more of the risk himself. And if that makes the plan impossible, perhaps the plan was never strong enough to justify placing Jenny's security inside it. That is an uncomfortable conclusion, but it is an important one. The person asking for money should be able to explain why the person giving it is protected. If the entire plan only works when Jenny takes the biggest risk, then Jenny deserves to question whether this is actually a shared future. Now imagine the argument reaching its final stage. Sumit has explained his position. Jenny has explained hers. The old history has been dragged into the room. Both are exhausted. And Sumit finally asks her, "So you really will not do this?" Jenny says no. There is no more information to add. That is the moment. If Sumit says, "I hate this decision, but you are my wife and we will find another way," then everything changes in a positive direction. He proves that the marriage is not conditional on the money. He proves that Jenny's value is not connected to what she can provide. He proves that years of conflict actually taught him something about partnership. And Jenny may trust him more after refusing than she would have trusted him after giving him the money. That is the strange twist. Sometimes hearing no strengthens a relationship because it proves love can survive disappointment. But if Sumit reacts by making Jenny afraid that the marriage itself is in danger, then the meaning of the entire conversation changes immediately. Now Jenny is not deciding whether to fund a plan. She is deciding whether she has to pay to feel secure in her own relationship. That would be devastating because of everything this couple represents to viewers. Their story has always been about love surviving impossible conditions. They fought against expectations. They fought against distance. They fought against family pressure. They fought through secrets that should have ended everything. After all that, it would be shocking if the thing that finally exposed the weakness in their marriage was not another giant scandal but a simple boundary. No, one word. That is all it takes to discover whether sacrifice was appreciated or expected. And maybe that is what Jenny needs most at this stage of her life. Not another dramatic declaration, not another promise, not another moment where Sumit tells her how much he loves her. She may need evidence that she can disappoint him without losing him. That is a completely different kind of security. If Jenny knows she can refuse something important, and Sumit still treats her with respect, she does not have to constantly prove that she deserves the relationship. She can finally live inside it. But if every serious disagreement becomes a test of loyalty, then peace will always remain one crisis away from disappearing. And that may be the biggest hidden problem behind the entire $30,000 question. Jenny and Sumit became experts at surviving emergencies. They may never have learned how to disagree safely. Those are not the same skill. During a crisis, two people can cling to each other because they are terrified of losing everything. During an ordinary disagreement, they have to tolerate frustration without turning the relationship into the weapon. That requires emotional security. It requires both people to know the marriage will still exist tomorrow, even if tonight's answer is no. Without that security, every argument becomes bigger than the issue itself. Money becomes love, a business decision becomes loyalty, a refusal becomes rejection, a question becomes distrust, and suddenly $30,000 carries the weight of the entire relationship. That is too much pressure for any financial decision. So if Jenny really wants to protect this marriage in this scenario, the smartest move may be refusing to answer immediately. She could tell Sumit that they need to separate the financial problem from the emotional problem. First, show me the numbers. Then show me the alternatives. Then explain the risk. Then we decide together. No guilt. No scorekeeping. No bringing up old sacrifices. No comparing who suffered more. Just the decision. If they cannot do that, then giving or refusing the money will not solve anything. The next crisis will simply create the same fight with a different number. That is the real test of whether their marriage has matured. Can they stop treating every problem like another chapter in their epic love story and simply act like two adults responsible for the same household? Because romance can carry people through extraordinary moments. Routine keeps them together afterward. And routine requires planning. It requires knowing what happens if income drops. It requires knowing who controls savings. It requires knowing what is protected. It requires knowing whether both people agree before major money moves. Those conversations may not make dramatic television, but they decide whether couples feel safe once the cameras are gone. Jenny's situation makes that especially important. She should never have to wonder whether protecting herself means betraying her husband. Sumit should never have to wonder whether Jenny's refusal means she stopped believing in him. They need enough trust to understand that disagreement does not automatically equal rejection. If they have that, $30,000 cannot destroy them. If they do not have that, even $3,000 could eventually expose the same problem. And that is why the number may be the least interesting part of this entire story. The real question is what each person believes love should require. Does Sumit believe love means Jenny should take the risk because he needs her? Does Jenny believe love means Sumit should never ask her to take a risk that scares her? Both ideas can become unhealthy if pushed too far. A marriage where nobody ever sacrifices for the other person will struggle. A marriage where sacrifice is constantly demanded will struggle too. The balance is whether each person can give freely, instead of giving because they are afraid of what happens if they refuse. That freedom is everything. If Jenny chooses to help Sumit because she understands the plan and genuinely wants to, that is partnership. If Jenny gives him money because she fears losing the marriage, that is something completely different. And only Jenny could know which feeling is driving the decision. That may be why viewers should be careful before reducing the situation to a simple villain story. The headline "Sumit demanded $30,000" sounds explosive, but the truth that would actually change everything is not whether those words were spoken. It is whether Jenny felt safe saying no. That answer would tell us where the power sits. It would tell us whether their relationship grew beyond its chaotic beginning. It would tell us whether Sumit learned that commitment does not mean control. And it would tell us whether Jenny learned that love does not require giving away every layer of security she has left. If she says no and the marriage survives, then maybe Jenny and Sumit have finally reached a stronger stage than viewers expected. If she says no and everything starts collapsing, then the $30,000 did not destroy the relationship. It exposed what was already fragile. That is the difference. Money does not always create the problem. Sometimes it simply turns the lights on. And once the lights are on, Jenny cannot pretend she did not see what was there. Neither can Sumit. So the final question is not whether Jenny should hand over $30,000. The final question is whether she should ever have to wonder if saying no will cost her the man she spent years fighting to keep. Because if Sumit truly sees Jenny as his partner, he can disagree with her, be angry with her, feel disappointed by her decision, and still make sure she knows that the marriage is not for sale. And if Jenny truly sees Sumit as her partner, she can hear his fears, understand why the money matters to him, and still protect a boundary without turning him into the villain automatically. That would be the strongest possible ending. Not Jenny giving in, not Sumit winning, not another dramatic breakup. Two people discovering that after spending years fighting everyone else. The hardest thing they may ever have to learn is how to disagree with each other without threatening what they built. And if they cannot do that, then $30,000 may become the smallest part of a much larger problem. So tell me where you stand. If Sumit came to Jenny with a serious financial problem and asked for $30,000, should Jenny consider helping because marriage means facing major problems together, or has she already sacrificed enough and earned the right to protect whatever security she has left? More importantly, if Jenny refused, what reaction from Sumit would immediately change your opinion of him? Would you understand frustration? Or would any attempt to make the relationship conditional cross the line for you? Drop your take in the comments because the answer says a lot about what viewers believe partnership should really look like. And subscribe if you want more deep 90-day relationship breakdowns where the biggest story is not always the headline, but what the pressure reveals underneath it. This video is a fictionalized commentary scenario created for entertainment.